Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today on February 7th of 2022 to talk to you about your safety, to talk about the global safety, whether it be from global terrorism, whether it be from war, whether it be from nuclear war. All of these will be contained in this story. So let's go through this. Well, actually, we want to take a moment before we get to this. We want to mention that if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience and taking time out of your day. We do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out and speak to you on all social media that the internet overlords will allow to hear your voice, because we believe in free speech. We believe in your right to be able to speak about the things that affect you. Every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we receive your tweets, your chats, your phone calls to hear what you think about the issues that affect every single one of us around the globe. And we look forward to seeing you next Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So when I say that there's an issue that is important to everyone, that this will affect everybody's freedom, your safety, the effect of terror on your life, I'm not kidding. This is not hyperbole. This is being very exact and very true. And it's an ongoing problem that we've been speaking about for the last year in depth as it has become worse and worse. Let me explain what we're talking about. Most recently, if you're following the channel, you may have seen our video on January 11th of 2022 when we were speaking about Russia, North Korea, and Iran and how they are testing the Biden-Harris administration, as well as the fact that the Biden-Harris administration is in the middle of negotiations with each of these countries, and each of those deals have been bad. They've been terrible for the future, the stability of the globe, and the impact on global terror. Now, this is something that's been going on for a long time. The roots of all of this actually go back farther than most people will remember, and definitely farther than most in the news media will tell you. They won't remember, and they hope you don't remember things that have happened before. Kind of like when we're talking about on May 28th of 2019, when the Jerusalem Post was speaking about actions within the Democratic Party with the nation of Iran, and we were talking about how that impacted you. In part, we said this. There was a conversation that actually the foreign minister of Iran, Mr. Javed Zarif, actually met with Senator Diane Feinstein, and they had dinner, and they talked. And this is the thing that really drives me crazy about this, is the thing that they wanted to talk about. Here's what it was. According to Jerusalem Post, the Iranian foreign minister's trip to the United States was designed to undermine the Trump administration's tough talk on Iran and to stir divisions. This is according to Axios. So, in 2019, Diane Feinstein, a sitting United States senator who is still in office, was meeting with the nation of Iran to forward and advance the goals of the Iranian nation. That's an important thing, that a U.S. senator decided to forward the agenda of a foreign nation against the will of a sitting U.S. president and technically the United States people. Now, it doesn't matter whether you like President Trump or not. It doesn't matter if you agree with his policies or not. A senator decided to go and side with a foreign country and advance the interests of a foreign country over the U.S. president because it was politically advantageous to her party, not to the nation, not to national security, not to global terror reduction. This was political in itself. Everything was about it was political. And this centered around the fact that the Trump administration, like many, believed that the Iran nuclear deal was bad, and understanding that then Secretary of State John Kerry had already admitted in 2016 that the United States was actively funding global terror through Iran and its Iran, the IRGC, the Iranian terror organization. So that's a big deal. That makes a big difference. And we know that Diane Feinstein was very much a supporter of Joe Biden, and that was in September of 2019, just a couple of months after speaking on behalf of Iran. Now, I have a lot of problems with Senator Diane Feinstein, especially because she had a spy for 20 years. She had a spy in her office, her driver who went to meetings for her, spoke on behalf of her, was helping to negotiate deals for her, and had God knows what kind of influence on her and her policies that she promoted. So I have always found, since that news was broken by the major news media, that Senator Feinstein is suspect in her actions and is not necessarily in the best interest of the United States. You may disagree, and that's fine. But I want you to understand the context. And the context in 2019 and since is that Diane Feinstein was more than willing to work with the global leader of terror, Iran, to disrupt the actions of a sitting president because of politics. That's not in the best interest of the American people. It has never been. And the Iran nuclear deal is not in the best interest of the American people. Because again, we know directly from then Secretary of State John Kerry in 2016 on CNBC, as he said, the United States was funding global terror because of the Iran nuclear deal, reducing the global stability and increasing global terror. This is not a good thing. And the deal didn't protect America because it allowed Iran to build an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile that would allow Iran to attack our only allies in the Middle East, Israel. It would allow them to attack Europe and all of our allies there, as well as potentially being able to attack the United States. Something that throughout the entire Iran nuclear deal and since, Iran has declared is their intent, that the end goal for Iran is to destroy both Israel and the United States, regardless of the political preferences of whomever is in charge of either of those countries. No matter what they do, their existence must be wiped off the face of the earth, according to the Ayatollah Khomeini and the viewpoint of Iran for the last 40 years. So that made me think, because we've had ongoing negotiations, and as we said in January 11th of 2022, the actions by the Biden administration seem to be not only weak, but not in the best interest of the United States and global stability. And that made me think of something. Who speaks about the interactions of nations, of wars, active and not active? Well, that made me think of Sun Tzu. Now, many people may not be familiar with him, but everyone who has served in the military, every officer of every military around the world over the last, 3,000 to 5,000 years have read Sun Tzu. Many businessmen read Sun Tzu. The application of his works applies to everyday life. Sun Tzu said, in discussing weak points and strong, he said, whoever is the first in the field and waits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted. What does that mean? Well, let's think about that, because he's talking about military tactics, but it applies to life as well as negotiations. In terms of the Iran nuclear deal, Iran is the first in the field. They're the ones who are trying to give the United States the opportunity to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal. This is their bargaining chip. The United States, certain parts of the United States, want to have the Iran nuclear deal. Iran wants the sanctions, economic sanctions, lifted so that they can increase the net global terror around the world and better be able to remove Israel and the United States. That's their long-term goal. No matter how they get there, they don't really care. At the end of the day, they want to kill Israel and America. So they're the first in 2019, anticipating the 2020 election and who might win. They have already put things in place to pressure the Trump administration to help weaken it and to remove it so that they could better have leverage against the next administration and be able to achieve their goals that much better. And they had Diane Feinstein working on their benefit to do that. Iran is the first in the field, and they're awaiting whoever wins the election. Iran is winning. Sun Tzu goes on to say, therefore, the clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy's will to be imposed on him. The Biden administration, since they took office, have been begging Iran to reinstate the Iran nuclear deal. They have been in negotiations almost from the very second that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took the White House. And they have been in the middle of these negotiations, and the negotiations have not advanced. They have failed over and over again. In fact, for many months, Iran just simply said, no, we're not going to talk to you at all. And we're not talking to the United States one-on-one. We're only going to talk as a group of nations, including Europe and Russia and China, in a negotiation amongst 8 nations about the Iran nuclear deal. But their insistence is they must get the economic sanctions removed in its entirety and guaranteed that no other president could ever change that in the future, which is almost impossible to guarantee. So again, Iran is imposing its will on Europe, on the United States, but not the vice versa. They're in the winning position. They have control. And we have seen in article after article, there is the statement coming from America and from Europe that the clock is ticking down and they're running out of time to make a deal. Iran isn't worried about the time. They have the winning position. They will either get a nuclear weapon or they will get the Iran nuclear deal on their terms. Either way, they win. Their position is improved and they get closer to being able to destroy Israel and the United States. Going on, in the third point, Sun Tzu says, by holding out advantages to him, he can cause the enemy to approach of his own accord, or by inflicting damage, he can make it impossible for the enemy to draw near. And again, what are we seeing with this conflict with the United States? Iran is holding out the advantage. They have the advantage. The United States must come to them and under the Biden-Harris administration must negotiate with them on their terms. They have time on their side. They have the leverage on their side. And they have at least one senator, Senator Diane Feinstein, who is actively working as their agent and their advocate inside the United States policymakers in the Senate. So this is problematic. And then we go on. There's another thing I want to mention here, and I know not everyone's interested in Sun Tzu, but I think it's important. Hence, the general that is skillful in attack, whose opponent does not know what to defend, and is skillful in defense, whose opponent does not know what to attack. The Biden-Harris administration doesn't know what it's doing in terms of international policy. We have discussed that many times on this channel. We have seen with Iran, with North Korea, with China, with Russia, they don't have an international policy. We saw that with Afghanistan and the rise of the Taliban, the empowerment of the Taliban by the Biden-Harris administration and its policies, abandoning American citizens in Afghanistan, and now, most recently, in Kiev, in the Ukraine. That's not hyperbole. That is factually happening. That is, as reported around the world, it is happening. And we were one of the first in the world to discuss that. So we have seen over and over again, the Biden-Harris administration is weak on international policy. They are desperate politically to get a win. They have been begging Iran for a nuclear deal so that they can have a win to present to their core constituents. And Iran has been playing this game since 2019. That's a troubling scenario that I presented to you, and it is evident in the news, but most people either don't remember all parts of the news because it goes back over time, or the news doesn't want you to come to that conclusion. And this story and everything talking about Iran, the nuclear deal, international policy in reference to the Biden-Harris administration has been downplayed by the major news media, whether it be MSNBC, CNBC, CNN, New York Times. They've all been downplaying this. You haven't been hearing a lot about the Iran nuclear deal or the negotiations of the United States with Iran, let alone negotiations with North Korea, which have failed since Biden has been in office, or even in Russia. In fact, Russia is being used to cover this up so you don't see. So you're not paying attention to the other international conflicts. You're busy hearing Biden say, no, I'm really strong. I'm going to protect the Ukraine without actually putting any troops into the Ukraine, with minimal actual action being done and abandoning Americans in the Ukraine. But he's strong because he needs to project a strong image to try and improve his approval rating, which has collapsed since the failure of the Afghan route and the abandonment of hundreds, not 85, 479 to 2,000 Americans in Afghanistan, something that the Biden-Harris administration has not apologized for and has sought to hide and completely obfuscate from the American public's knowledge. It is a fact. It has been reported both by the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, but it's not big news. Should be, but it isn't. But we've reached a critical point now where we are going to see, before probably by the first week of March, an Iran nuclear deal. And that isn't going to be good for anyone in the world. And we know this, and it's so obvious that even the Wall Street Journal has noticed this, and they're reporting about it. In an opinion piece by the Wall Street Journal, written by the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. So this is an editorial. Rushing to a weaker Iran deal, the U.S. makes another preemptive concession as Tehran demands more. This should be bigger news. You're not hearing this on CNN. You're not hearing this on MSNBC, ABC, CBS. You're not hearing this from the New York Times. They are not telling you that the Biden administration is rushing and desperate to make a deal, and they are making a bad deal. They are empowering Iran to be able to have more global terror and nuclear weapons, just so Joe Biden can say he made a deal, and to make some of the progressive supporters happy. Let's go to, and I don't like using this very often, but Al Jazeera, as they quoted the deal, and they said, because the United States over the weekend made a deal with Iran. They gave Iran, with no preconditions, with no ties, they just gave Iran a lifting of sanctions. And this is, and I quote, "The lifting of some sanctions can, in the true sense of the word, translate into their goodwill. Americans talk about it, but it should be known that what happens on paper is good, but not good enough," according to the Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Bolaladen. I got that name wrong, and I don't care, it's Iran. So I got it wrong. But he's speaking about what the United States just did. The United States gave Iran a lifting of sanctions. The United States freed up Iran's ability to work with foreign nations and to be able to empower that nation in its development of nuclear power, which very quickly can be transformed into nuclear weapons. That is a fact. And they weren't the only ones speaking about it. Of course, this also was reported by Town Hall. And this was on, to be exact, February 6th, Sunday. Joe Biden's move on sanctions waivers for Iran pleases nobody. And again, they cite the fact that a senior State Department official denied that Friday's step was a concession to Iran, instead characterized it as a return to the status quo. This is from the Biden administration's view, a view that was created in 2019 when Diane Feinstein was advocating for Iran just so that they could have a political win in 2020. That's their status quo, a political advantage for Democrats. That's the status quo. Going on, this is not a signal that we are about to reach an understanding on a mutual return to full implementation of the Iran nuclear deal. The sanctions waiver is designed to facilitate discussions that would help to close a deal on a mutual return to the full implementation of the Iran nuclear deal and lay the groundwork for Iran's return to performance of its Iran nuclear deal commitments. Absent the sanctions waiver, detailed technical discussions with a third parties regarding disposition of stockpiles and other activities of nonproliferation value cannot take place. In essence, the United States has said, we're giving a carrot with no stick involved to Iran. We're giving them a gift. And we hope that when they get this gift, they're going to feel better about making the Iran nuclear deal. We are putting our hands out, and like was said by Sun Tzu, we're not being the clever combatant. We're not imposing our will on the enemy, and the enemy is being imposed upon the United States. Iran has the advantage. That's just clear. Iran is getting gifts from the Biden-Harris administration, hoping that Iran will say, well, aren't they being nice? There's such goodwill. Okay, we will have the negotiations with you, and we will make a deal with you. Iran hasn't earned anything. As reported by the Washington Times, the so-called civilian nuke or civ nuke waivers restored by the Biden administration specifically allow third-party countries to work in Iran on Iranian civil nuclear projects. Those nations are China and Russia. China and Russia can help Iran with its civil nuclear projects, which, as anyone who knows about nuclear facilities, can be converted very quickly to producing nuclear weapons. And Iran has every reason to speak with China and Russia because all three of them oppose the United States and its existence to various degrees. So they can work on the Iran civil nuclear projects at the Bushehr nuclear power station, which is a civilian power station, the Iraq heavy water power, and Tehran nuclear reactor. The Iraq heavy water facility is important because we know that that facility has been used and it was created to help create nuclear weapons. Now, recently, since 2019, the same time that Iran was getting Senator Diane Feinstein on its side to advocate for them, they said that they would make that a light water power facility which would not be able to create nuclear materials. If you trust Iran, who has a stated end goal of destroying Israel and America, I do not trust them because I understand their stated goal is to destroy everyone. Liberals, progressives, conservatives, libertarians, Republicans, black, white, gay, doesn't matter. They want you dead if you're an American or if you're an Israeli. That's their end goal. Why do I trust that they say, well, we've reduced our nuclear materials capabilities? Trust us. I don't. Not when they're working with China and Russia on those facilities, and China and Russia have a goal to destroy the United States as well. You may think I am wrong. That's fine. But let's look at what's being said in the Jerusalem Post about this same issue. Going to the Jerusalem Post, and this is from, again, Sunday, February 6th, and talking about this unilateral gift from the United States to Iran. Put simply, Washington's leverage to get the Ayatollah to return to the nuclear limits is the existing sanctions leverage. If the United States starts to lift sanctions before Iran has given up anything, why should the Islamic Republic show any readiness to compromise? They go on to say, this goes along with other recent signs, such as a split in the United States negotiating team, from which 3 members resigned because they believed the Biden administration's approach to the negotiations was too flexible and lenient towards Tehran. Again, the United States is showing weakness. They are showing that they are subservient to the will of Iran. Iran has a single stated purpose. They want the sanctions lifted. This allows them to fund more global terror, and it enables them to create more to make an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, which would then allow them to send missiles, especially nuclear missiles, into Israel and the United States and our allies in Europe, and to destroy them because they do not believe what Iran and the Ayatollah believe in terms of religion. And therefore, we must be removed from the face of the earth. This is something that has been stated for 40 years by Iran. Again, I want you to have full context. I want you to understand the historical as well as the current events that are going on and how this is destabilizing the world, because no other news media is telling you this. They are not giving you this context. They do not want you to understand this. And when we are listening to the Jerusalem Post, they ask a fantastic question. If the United States is already giving away the very thing it needs for leverage, why should Iran change their position? Iran is winning. They are imposing their will on the United States, not the other way around. They are getting what they want, slowly and in pieces, but they're getting what they want. They are winning. And they haven't even had to do anything. They're barely having negotiations. This is incredibly important. And I want you to understand that, according to the Times of Israel, waived Iran sanctions allow a redesign of the Fordo plant with the cooperation of Russia and China. This is important. The U.S. decision to ease sanctions, as we have just discussed, on Iran on Friday includes 6 clauses that now allow foreign countries and companies from Russia, China, and Europe to cooperate with non-military parts of Iran's nuclear program, according to several experts. And that, again, means that even though we're working on non-military, the conversion is very simple. In fact, if you talk to military experts, they will tell you that a chemical plant that creates baby food, could be converted into making chemical weapons and weapons of war in a matter of a day or two. It is very similar in terms of nuclear weapons, although a little bit longer, to rather rapidly convert civilian military nuclear facilities into nuclear weapons facilities. It doesn't take a lot of time to change that over. And when we see that China and Russia are working on that, and China has been giving North Korea, it allowed them to get nuclear weapons. It's allowing them to use hypersonic missiles, which are to the disadvantage of Japan, South Korea, and the United States. Why do we think that they wouldn't do the same thing for Iran? And Russia has a vested interest in this as well. So we have no reason to have trust and faith here, other than the fact that we can always go back to what's been happening since 2019 and actually prior, is that Senator Diane Feinstein and perhaps other members of the Democratic Party have been looking for power and are willing to exchange global stability to maintain that power. That is the fact. And Iran has made sure that they have emphasized that they are in the winning seat. If we look at Reuters and their article from today, February 7th at 5 a.m., Iran says the success of nuclear talks hinges on the removal of sanctions. And they mention, and this is from Iran's foreign minister, Washington has decided to take a step which has no impact on Iran's economic situation. He described the move, the United States move, as a good but insignificant step. Now, I want you to think about what he's saying there. See, he's controlling the conversation. He's controlling the terms of the deal. He said, well, this is not significant. If it weren't significant, there wouldn't be sanctions. And countries wouldn't be blocked from working on this with Iran if it weren't significant. If it had no economic value, then it would never have been given a sanction in the first place. So to say that it has no impact on the economics of Iran is a lie. Thinking of it another way, and let's assume that the civilian nuclear power plant is purely for creating nuclear power, electricity for Iran. Electricity is money. You pay an electric bill every month. Businesses pay an electric bill. You need electricity to power manufacturing facilities, to be able to do research, to be able to run schools and education. Electricity is money. It is the vehicle by which an economic impact is made. So to say that there is no value in this is to downplay it and to lie about the truth. And Iran knows this. But in devaluing the gift that the United States made, they encourage and demand, in effect, that the United States give more. It's saying, well, that was nice, but you didn't do anything yet. Do you want to impress us? Do you want to turn our opinion? Give us more. Give us something worth more. It's just a leverage tactic. And again, going back to Sun Tzu, which I must go back to, because this has been one of the most important ways of committing war. It's every officer in every country in the world has read this, and it is part of military discipline. Again, therefore, the clever combatant imposes his will on his enemy, but does not allow the enemy's will to be imposed on him. Iran is saying, your gift is meaningless. Give us something better. Give us more. Give us what we want. And the United States is put into the position of having to give more and more without actually gaining anything in its place. The United States has won nothing. And we know that because the United States has decided to give this, why would they do that? What's the motivation? Why do they desperately need the Iran nuclear deal? Because Joe Biden needs a victory. He needs something to turn his presidential approval somewhere near positive. He needs something that will rally progressives and Democrats in the 2022 midterms to try and prevent a slaughter of his party, as is predicted by everyone at this point, to try and retain some of his power in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. He needs something to drive voters. He needs something to give some strength to his policies. And everyone in the world knows it. And everyone in the world is taking advantage of that. Because Joe Biden is so laser focused on the political power and the domestic balance of power in the United States, they haven't developed an international policy. They haven't been paying attention to the various players internationally. That's why we see North Korea firing 7 hypersonic missiles at our allies, Japan, and threatening South Korea. That's why China is continuously saying and building up its military to intimidate Taiwan. It's why Russia has decided now is a great time to go back into the Ukraine, just as they did under President Obama, who was also considered weak on international policy. Because the advantage is with them and not the United States, that has lost focus and has lost attention and is not leading the world in these situations. I'm trying to make it as clear as possible because almost no news media has recognized the potential damage here. And they will not give you, even when they do recognize it, they are not willing to give you context on how long this has been happening and how this will affect you. And let me make it clear on how this affects you, short term and long term. Short term, in lifting the economic sanctions, even on the civilian level, by increasing the amount of electricity, that means there is more power to manufacture weapons, like the rockets that were used by Hezbollah to attack Israelis in the spring of 2021. That it enables them to have more lights and power to educate the various global terrorists that Iran supports throughout the world. If that is the only thing that happens, that is a net increase in the global instability in the world, and that will kill people in the world because it endangers Israel and, through the global terrorists, the United States as well, citizens both domestically and abroad. So short term, there is a greater threat to Americans and our allies around the world by doing these gifts and by getting into the Iran nuclear deal without significant conditions to limit what Iran is doing, which the Biden administration has not considered and which Iran completely rejects. Regardless of who's politically in power, because the United States allows women to go to school, to drive cars, that the United States allows gays and transsexuals to exist. Forget about what they do, just for them to exist, and that the American people do not follow the version of Islam that these fanatics in Iran actually follow. So their long-term goal is always to destroy us, and to do so economically, to do that with military, to do that with nuclear weapons, is something that is on the table for them, and they are willing to wait. They have been waging this, essentially a war, for 40 years. They just haven't been doing it conventionally. They've been using terrorist organizations. They've been funding these groups and supplying them with rockets to attack Israel, to attack Americans, and to ambush them and suicide bomb them. They're committing a war. They're just not having a war one-on-one. If we understand the conditions of win for Iran, if we understand the desires short-term of the Biden administration and why it has those goals, and if we use those two factors to understand what's happening with the Iran nuclear deal, we are in trouble. The Biden administration is harming America in the same way that Diane Feinstein in 2019 harmed America by trying to destabilize our government, to limit our government so that their political party would have an advantage. That is the worst thing that you could possibly do, putting politics, putting a political faction above the best interest of the United States. Now, there are some who will say, well, Mike, you don't understand because nuclear powers, having nuclear weapons, is the worst thing that could possibly happen, and that is worse than everything else. If you believe that, I would like you to go through, and we will have the links of everything we've just discussed. I would like you to go through some of the information we've just provided, to think of it and tell us exactly how are we wrong, short-term or long-term, on the goals of Iran, and how the Biden administration is helping them, that they are increasing the likelihood of the end goals of Iran. You may dispute this. We'd like to hear why you dispute it. And most of all, we want you to be informed. We hope that if you have found this to be informative, interesting, in any way positive for you, we thank you. We hope you like and share this, and we look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to share your thoughts on this and other issues that affect us all. Thank you.